Welcome to the second installment of Climate and Cocktails, a series of conversations with the movers and shakers in the private sector that are tackling climate change and bringing to bear the clean tech solutions of the future. I'm Jules Kortenhorst, the CEO of RMI, where we work to accelerate the transition to secure a clean, prosperous, net zero energy future. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Tom Steyer, an investor, philanthropist, and environmentalist who is committed to decarbonization through innovation and technology. We're in Glasgow, just outside of COP26, where business leaders and policymakers are looking to find a way to turn climate commitments into real action. Tom and I will talk today about climate change, climate technologies, and financing. Tom, why don't you kick us off by talking a little bit about your journey to become a climate warrior?
So I've thought hard about this, and it really wasn't one moment. I think the first thing that happened was I really wanted my family to see the wildest part of North America. And I'd spent a summer working in Alaska, so I wanted to take them back into the bush country of Alaska so they could see what the land looked like before Europeans showed up. And we went back to some of the places that I'd been in the summer when I'd worked in Alaska, which was, 30 years before. And the very, very obvious and shocking reduction in the level of the glaciers and the melt absolutely blew us all away. And it was one of those things, it wasn't a close call. I don't think I'd really thought about that. I'd obviously read stories, but I'd never really come home to me. I think that was part of it. I think the second thing that was part of it is I really, strangely enough, myself got more religious. Nothing to do with climate, but just a renewal of faith in God. And I felt like more serious about considering the purpose of walking around the planet. I think those two things happened. And I think the third thing that really forced me to confront this was sitting around with my family. And we used to play this game. If you're 100 years from now and you look back, what are the things that we as a people are doing where you go? People in 100 years would say, why were they so blind? Why were they so foolish? Why were they so cruel? And I know that we all do that looking back 100 years from we are looking at people and saying, how could you have been so thoughtless? And we did it, and we all decided, my gosh, the climate crisis is going to look like, how could we have missed it? And I think between those three things, it just became clear to me that there was an obligation on all of us. But, I felt it personally to try to make sure that in 100 years, they didn't think, those darn ancestors of ours were so foolish and dumb and selfish.
That is interesting because the parallel for my journey is that after I sold my last business, I took a sabbatical, and during that sabbatical, with the family traveled to Africa. And the combination of seeing the beauty of nature, realizing the scarcity of water, but also feeling the spirituality of being in that setting was what set me on the journey. And it was the time of inconvenient truth, and the rest is history. And here we are. So you've just announced a really bold new idea, the Galvanized investment platform. Tell us about it.
Well, I really started to be active around climate around 15 years ago. And I did it through giving money away, trying to sponsor research, and then by getting involved in kind of the political conversation in the United States to try and bring people's awareness up to make the facts known in a bipartisan way. And then in 2012, I actually left my investment business that I'd started 27 years ago to focus explicitly on what I considered the national conversation around climate, to try and make sure that we as a country came to the right conclusions, did the right thing, and did our part in the world. And I did that for 8 years full time, and a lot of stuff happened. But at the end of 2020, I basically concluded that the conversation was over. That 75% of Americans think we should be taking action on the climate crisis, that we should be moving to renewable energy, that we should be doing all those things. And my honest experience in the United States is when you get to 75%, that's about the ceiling. You know, an awful lot of Americans still don't believe in evolution, and that's their choice, but it's a choice. And if you really are denying the climate crisis at this point, it's a choice. You've had 1,000 times to consider the facts. So I really felt like the question about what to do has been answered. The strategy is set. The question is, are we going to execute? And so I wanted to be part of the execution. So I started a company with an old friend of mine who we'd been partners in business before, but also really close friends, a woman who is a groomsman in my wedding. So someone who's been a close personal and professional friend of mine for 40 years. And we decided we'll start a company to invest in climate solutions, just in that, so dedicated, purpose-driven, but also try and do it comprehensively in the sense of doing it at every part of the capital stack, you know, around the world. And lastly, to try and do it as part of the climate solutions ecosystem, you know, understanding that it was going to be done in the context of national and international policy, that it was going to be done in conjunction with other investors and companies, with NGOs, you know, that really this is civil society, global society, deciding to really rebuild the world in a sustainable way.
I think you and I often talk about our children, and it is also really interesting to see how in their generation, this is now the coolest subject to be working on. And we see massive interest from their generation to be working in this area as well.
Well, look, if you have to rebuild the world, there's an awful lot of business to be done. You know, there's an enormous amount of work, there's an enormous amount of organizing, and there's an enormous amount of innovating to do. And, you know, it's just a gigantic business opportunity. Yeah. I believe that if we can preserve the natural world, we will have created a possibility for humans around the globe to live in a way that no one can even imagine in terms of how good it can be.
Talking about COP, you have had many a meeting here in the last week. You have seen the progress we're making. What's your sort of initial response?
I believe in a couple of ways. I think that the pledges have moved. If people live up to their NDCs, to their basic national pledges, then I think that there's been very dramatic progress made towards a goal that is still not acceptable, honestly not close to acceptable, but a dramatic move towards acceptable. And I also believe, and this is definitely true, that the participation of civil society, specifically the business community and finance community. I mean, I think that the rest of civil society has been coming to these for a while. But the number of business and finance people from big organizations who suddenly think it's incumbent on them to show up here physically and to show up here, you know, with significant announcements and promises is many, many multiples of anything I've ever seen before. And so, you know, I was saying, in my opinion, I started Galvanize Climate Solutions because I felt the conversation was over, and now we're into the execution phase. And I believe that watching these business and finance people come here, it's like, okay, here we go. This is the execution phase. What do you got?
I think that's absolutely right. I think this is my 10th COP. I need to do the precise tally at some point. Over the course of this week, I've had more meetings and conversations with CEOs of Fortune 100 companies here in Glasgow than in all previous 9 COPs combined. Yeah. And it is because everybody is starting to realize this is now about implementation. This is now about execution. And it is therefore also sort of interesting that the negotiations on one side of the COP and what we used to refer to as the side events on the other side of the COP, that's sort of blending much more together because the real economy is not a side event, right? The real economy is real, it's where it's going to happen.
You know, you've seen such a dramatic turnaround by so many major American companies in the last 2 years. People who were fighting, resisting, hanging on to the fossil fuel economy as banks, as car companies, and on and on and on, who've now completely flipped and are now, you know, climate warriors and, you know, and you ask yourself, well, what really changed? You know, why would they make this dramatic change? Was it the Biden election? Did their employees insist on it? And you know, honestly, it's impossible to miss that for the car companies, their valuation of the big traditional car companies, Ford and GM in the United States, were worth 1/10 as much as Tesla. Yeah. And the CEOs of those companies probably only check that 10 times a day. And it made them crazy. And they're sitting there going like, this company is worth 10 times us, and they sell a fraction of the cars we sell. They make no money. But it was incredible pressure. Look, Jules, I want to say, I am not doing this for the money. I do want to harness the power of capitalism. I do. And I think that if you look around the world and look where the innovation has happened, where the excitement has happened, not just in the 21st century or the 20th century, but going back, you know, it's been in very specific organizations and systems. And you and I have had this conversation, and I've argued with this, that there's a way to set this up. But, you know, the funny thing is, as somebody who was in business for 33 years and who's started a new business, I'm not that interested in money. I'm very interested in the impact. I'm very interested in participating, and I'm very ambitious about it. But, you know, the truth is I'm not that interested in high living. I'm very interested in outcomes.
I wish you a lot of success with that, Tom. Thank you.
Jules, here.
Cheers.
Cocktails.
Cocktails.